guess we'll start with the affirmative action case. I mean, do you have any takes on that? Are you more or less pleased with the decision, or uh,
I definitely think it's to say pleased with the decision. I don't know. I think it's more of a return to less racism, less race based decisions in America. Because the thing is, you can still, as an applicant to a college,
mhm.
you can still say, this is how race affected my life. This is how my life was different. These are hardships that I had based on my race where I felt like I was treated differently. But it's not just a default decision just because you're based on the color of your skin, you get certain treatment.
So my problem with the decision isn't the decision itself. It's more of what it left on the table. It's This did nothing for legacy admissions. It did not, like, if we're going to pretend that like colleges are merit based, which is what we've been doing. Um, I mean, why would you allow somebody who went to the school before to get preferential treatment for their children to get into the same school? So like if we're going to operate under the auspices of, we're completely enrolling students on merit, and then why aren't legacy admissions also disallowed?
But see, I don't look at it like that. Like I don't see it as these schools are only based on merit. It's just you don't get in because of the color of your skin. So I wasn't looking at this as this full sweeping, this is going to
Mhm.
level the playing field completely for everybody. It's more just taking away that one advantage. And again, if you had hardships, if you felt like you were treated poorly, you have that admissions essay to be able to put all that stuff in there and include it.
The thing is
It's
I don't disagree with that, but I'm also looking at, then what's the point of like FAFSA? Like if your main complaint is that, oh, well, you shouldn't get in just because you had a harder life than somebody else, like that's what FAFSA is. That's saying that, oh, well, my parents didn't have a lot of money, so therefore I need a government grant to go to school. Like it doesn't tackle any of that. All it's saying is, well, we're just going to take race out of the emissions things, which I don't agree, or I don't disagree with on paper, right? I don't disagree with that on paper. The problem is that it's been shown time and time again, you're going to end up with all white schools, all Asian schools, and all black schools. Like that, it's just the way this is going to pan out. So I think that this addresses a problem that wasn't really a problem. And I mean, we'll see how it plays out. Like history is going to be our guide. Like, but I really think that this decision is going to have a lot of consequences um, that just don't we don't see currently.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's kind of an over extrapolation to say that it's going to turn into all white schools, all Asian schools, all black schools. I mean, we already have certain schools that are like black only. Colin, it's not exclusively black, but I think it's like Brown University. You've got a handful of these schools that only admit certain students or heavily favor certain races. And I've always wondered how is that even legal? How is that not a violation of the Constitution when we're saying that you can't discriminate on the basis of sex or race or immutable characteristics?
I mean, I more or less agree with you on that fact. It's interesting when you start taking race into effect, because you can only go so far without it continuing to be racist. Like, I mean, we can pretend that we don't make decisions based on race in this country, but we absolutely do. So I'm not sure that the Supreme Court took everything into account. But for the most part, I don't disagree with this ruling. I think that we're going to have to see. I don't think it's this catastrophic thing that you hear a bunch of leftists talking about, but I do think that they do have a point where it's like, well, you got rid of one problem, but you left the other problems in place. I think legacy admissions need to be looked at. If the Supreme Court stance is that things should be merit based, then let's make it merit based all the way around.
So that's where I would kind of start to disagree is
Mhm.
going to be that legacy admissions it's still always going to be about money. So the
Right.
people that are going to be most likely to be donors are going to be people that went to that school, and the people that are going to be even more likely to be donors are going to be people that went to that school and their kids were able to go to that school. So if we're trying to get away from the federal government funding schools, funding colleges, and allowing it to be, it's not everybody has to go to college, then I think we need to have this reliance on private funding.
Mm. I mean, the problem with private funding is that when you start treating education as a business, it, you're assuming that outcomes are going to be the same, right? You're assuming once somebody gets a degree, they're going to go and get a decent job. But as we've seen time and time again, that's not played out. I mean, there's a whole joke. What do you do with a degree in psychology? Well, you end up working at Subway. Like it's the same like deal, and yet these guys are stuck with thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt in some cases, and with no ability to really pay that off. So I, I think relying on private funding for things like this is kind of a double-edged sword. Like you're going to end up in this scenario where private funds are going to pour in, interest rates are going to get insanely high because they're going to need to make money off the people that can actually pay versus the people that don't. I think you're asking for uh, I think you're asking for a collapse of our current financial system if that's the case.
Mm.
You're gonna saddle people with a ton of debt that they can't discharge via bankruptcy.
So that's actually tying into
Mhm.
like maybe we skip the LGBT stuff just but
Mhm.
in terms of like the loan forgiveness decision um that I really think students should be able to declare bankruptcy. I know allowing that if we just said okay anybody that has student loan debt can declare bankruptcy just go for it that would result in a collapse. I agree that there is a student debt crisis
Mhm.
but the thing is so people with degrees still make on average, I think it's about $22,000 a year more in that age range. Like I was just looking into this, it was age 22 to 27. You make about $52,000 a year,
Mhm.
which I thought was funny because that's what I was making at AT&T selling cell phones was about 50 to 55,000.
Right.
And then people in that age range that are high school diploma only, they'll make around 30,000. So you still have that college degree does still mean something. It means something on applications, even if you have that psychology degree and you're applying for a subway manager job. The person with the degree, it shows that you persevered through something, that you completed it, even if it's in some like anthropology or something that has no application to that job. It still shows that you tried and you
I
succeeded.
I mean, so the thing is like, yes, the numbers do bear out that way, but I think our takeaways are going to be different here. My takeaway from that is that the cost of a degree in this country has skyrocketed, and the jobs that you can get going out, yeah, you're going to make more than somebody with a high school diploma, sure, but it's not enough to justify the amount that you had to pay to get that degree. What the bet is hopefully at some point it will, but as we're finding out, it's a lower and lower percentage of cases that actually bears out. And I think if you were to make it to where students could actually declare bankruptcy, it would fix a lot of things for the individuals, but it would make banks, especially private banks, a little more iffy on whether or not they're going to issue a student loan. So it's this weird scenario that we've ended up in, which I do think the federal government needs to address. I think they need to be involved in it in some way because you have to somehow assuage the banking system that, hey, you're going to make money off this. So you need to issue loans, and at the same time you need to have a mechanism in place for those people that end up with crazy amounts of debt to somehow get out from underneath it.
So
um,
so I was actually looking into this, and apparently you can declare you can discharge your student loans in bankruptcy. It's just a completely separate petition that you have to file, and it's much more difficult. And I
yeah,
believe the
and
reason why is because it's federally guaranteed. It's the government not getting their money back, not the bank itself.
right, the likelihood of that happening is actually really low. If you look at the statistics on it, it's like less than 10% of people that actually file actually get their stuff discharged.
For sure,
It's
but if you look at the requirements, you got to be able to prove undue hardship. And as
Mhm.
I'm looking into it, that's the bigger question: is what does undue hardship actually mean? Because
Right.
when Congress passed that, they didn't provide a definition, so judges have just kind of had to figure it out for themselves.
Right, and it's the judge's discretion, right? And I mean, again, if you were in charge and somebody's like, "Hey, I'm only making like $30,000 a year here, and I got saddled with a whole bunch of debt. I need out from under it." They go, "Well, if we reset up your payment structure, that's more likely the outcome." which is not the same as a discharge, right? It's you're still going to pay this. We're just going to extend the length of your loan, more or less. Which, I think in some cases that's fair, but I would say that coupled with a reduction would probably go better for the consumer. Um, I
So
don't know. It's a hard one, and it's another one where I didn't disagree with the Supreme Court's ruling at face value. The thing that I do disagree with is the what do you call it? I'm gonna get stuck on this word. Um, what is it? It's the precedent it sets. Um, it's so the executive branch can create a department completely out of thin air, run it, but then the Supreme Court saying, well, you just can't dictate how it runs. I can create it out of thin air through executive order, but then I also don't get to dictate how it runs. That's supposedly left to Congress somehow. Like if you go look at the whole program, it was not set up the way that you think it would be. It's not one of those things that gets reaffirmed through Congress. The budget is, but not the actual program itself.
well,
And
let's just back up there a little bit. So why should the president just have unilateral
oh,
authority like that?
I think I think they shouldn't, but the Supreme Court has ruled time and time again that they do have the ability to set up these programs, like the whole what do you call it? The whole border situation, the Dreamer kids, right? Like that whole thing is a government program set up by the executive branch. And what this ruling does is say, well, the executive branch can set up a system, but it can't dictate how it runs. And I think that's a very dangerous thing.
That sounds like an ideal thing, that you
Why?
don't have one person just setting up programs and deciding how it runs. That's the entire way that our government is founded, with checks and balances. You've
Okay.
got the Supreme Court able to come in and do exactly what they've been doing, just
So if I'm
regulating.
if I'm a bad actor that's been elected president, I can just willy nilly set up these programs and then turn to Congress and be like, well, you got to fund these things now. Like that's not
Well,
really a power of the purse thing. Like you like.
so is and maybe this is just my ignorance, but wouldn't Congress have the ability to shut that down then?
I mean, technically, but let's just say I want to expand food stamps. If I wanted to extend food stamps, right, I could expand food stamps for a year without Congress intervening whatsoever. I could sink this country millions of dollars more into debt, probably billions, and Congress would be like, well, we're going to shut down this program, but they're still stuck with the bill at the end of the day. I think that's just bad policy all the way around. So I think the Supreme Court really needs to address executive orders and be like, look, this is what the president can do and what they can't. Because the way it sits right now is that if I were president, I could set up an entire government program, have it run for a year. Congress decides they want to shut it down, and then Congress still has to pay the bill for it. Like, I think this is a really weird gray area when it comes to executive action.
Yeah, you don't have to convince me on the executive order.